Hello, everyone. We are joined by John Ondrasik, Five for Fighting. If you're like me, you grew up with his music. It was part of you for every stage of life. If you're born after 2001, you may not be familiar with John's music, but hopefully you will be after this interview and getting to know him more. I had the pleasure of finally meeting him after years of being connected on Twitter at his most recent DC concert at the Lincoln Theater. It was a rousing time. I hadn't been to a concert in a couple years, so it was good to break my dry spell attending John's concert, getting to meet him and getting a feel for what he's all about. So, John, it's an honor to speak to you after the fact. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Gabby. It was really nice meeting you and your singer-songwriter of Pal, who was a great singer herself.
Yes, Madison is very talented, and she was only familiar with two of your songs. I said, you should know more. I was like, he's one of the best musicians out there. Has been a long-staying, influence in music. And so she's listening to more of your songs, but no, she loved coming to the concert. We had to do some work together to edit some video, and yeah, no, she'll take that as a compliment. But John, for people who are unfamiliar, especially for the younger set who might be watching,
Yeah.
what led you to become a singer-songwriter, musician, pianist?
My mom was a piano player, so I grew up in a very musical household. She started me at the piano at 2 years old, and I sang musical theater as a kid, and I always had this passion for music. And she was very wise. At like 13 or 14, when I wanted to go ride my skateboard, play basketball, chase girls, she let me quit taking piano lessons. So it was something now that if I had the passion for it, I would do it. And quickly after that, I started writing songs and I had the proficiency on the piano. And then as a teenager, I found Steve Perry's voice teacher from Journey because I love Steve Perry. And I started training vocally, but I always had this passion to write songs. And I'm so blessed that my childhood dream, still here we are, 30 years later after I got my record deal, that we're still out there doing performances and people are coming, and 100 Years and Superman seem to have become part of the American songbook, especially after the concert for New York. So I pinch myself every day. It's truly a blessing. And the concert in DC is always a bit different. There's always a kind of heavier weight there, certainly because of what Superman meant in DC after 9/11, but also just it's our country's home. It's ground zero for America. And a lot of my songs talk about America and the world we live in. So it was great to see you there and so many other folks. And it's a wild world, but music should be a part of it.
It really should, especially with so much despair, sometimes here at home and especially abroad. But one song you didn't play that I really like that kind of epitomizes Americana is also Slice,
Yeah,
kind of a play off of American Pie, Bye
yeah.
Bye Miss American Pie. And that would have been a fun song. Maybe you'll play it in future concerts or for upcoming tours. But yeah, it really does relate to Americana, a lot of your music. And you had talked about, having this voluminous catalog. How many songs have you written since your career began?
Well, I've written thousands of songs, many of them not very good, especially as a young songwriter. You have to write and imitate your favorite artists. Of course, I imitated Billy Joel and Elton John and James Taylor, but I also was a huge Prince fan. So I would imitate Prince. Those songs are something nobody wants to hear. But so that's how you grow as a songwriter. And I think out of my catalog, you recorded songs, I have 6 albums. So there's probably about 120 released master songs. But yeah, I'm not one of those prodigy Paul McCartneys. I have to write lots of songs to find a couple that can resonate in the culture. But that's really kind of part of anything, work ethic, relationships, all the stuff that goes into any business is no different than music. And I think for me, I'm a good example of that.
And you have published a lot of songs, as you mentioned. Superman is very famous. 100 Years, so many chances. That's also one of my other favorite ones. But more recently, you've kind of shifted. I wouldn't say shifted, but you've taken a little bit more of a political or maybe more outspoken kind of worldly tone to draw awareness to three recent events, horrific events: the Afghanistan withdrawal, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and more recently, October 7th, the horrible massacre by Hamas in Israel. And so, what led you to do that when other musicians haven't taken such a stand, a bold stance, to draw awareness to any of those? A lot of people have come out for Ukraine, which is great. Some of the musicians, they sometimes virtue signal. but they're not really speaking about what happened in either Afghanistan and especially not in Israel. So what led you to kind of stand out in that respect?
Well, it's always been kind of a tightrope for me. I kind of have a certain disdain for celebrities who get on their soapbox and lecture us um, about their politics as our moral betters. But there's also a history in music of people writing about the times and people writing about world events. Certainly the songs of the 60s, the civil rights songs, critical songs that you listen to, you get a sense of the times. Some of the protest songs to the Vietnam War, certainly Sun City, Live Aid, the Concert for New York. So music always has a place in the culture. But I've always kind of been more of, I write about freedom, I write about our troops, I write about the world in general, but I don't like necessarily take political slants.
Right.
The Afghanistan withdrawal was very personal to me. One, because I have a lot of veteran friends and friends in the military who were gutted by the fact that we abandoned their allies. But I actually had a personal friend who was going down and trying to rescue Americans that we abandoned. And her life was at risk. So that event really kind of hit me in the gut, like so many of us. And particularly when our military leaders basically came out and said, what a great success Afghanistan was. When General Milley and General Austin said, what an extraordinary success. I've always thought presidents can do crazy things because they're politicians. But I always thought if things got really bad, our military leaders would be honest with us because they have this thing called honor, and they broke that. And that really traumatized me and so many others. So I put out Blood on My Hands, and it became a song significant to our Afghan veterans. Certainly nobody wanted to talk about it because it was critical of the administration. Certainly the media shunned it. YouTube took it down. So I kind of, quickly understood anybody who doesn't have a narrative that is appealing to the media, you'll get censored. But that was important to me to do that. And I had no other plans to do that. But as you mentioned, after Ukraine, I wrote a song called Come On Man, Save the World, because I was inspired by Zelensky. Look, here's a guy who was offered a plane ticket to leave, and he stayed knowing he'd probably be assassinated with his wife and daughters. And where have we seen that fortitude in the West in the last 30 years? We've really become passive. We've become weak. We've been enabling Iran, China, Putin. And here we are with this guy, this comedian standing up to this behemoth. So that inspired me. And then, as you mentioned, October 7th, look, we were all horrified about the atrocities, but the collapse of so many of our moral institutions. The media became Hamas propagandists. Mm-hmm. Our college campuses run amok with anti-Semitism. And the members of Congress really, Rashid Tlaib, folks like that, really Hamas spokesman. And that also really scared me. And I wrote a song about that. And I think, of course, everything's taken politically because we're such a tribal society, but they're moral messages, right? Don't abandon people you swore to protect to the Taliban. Support, freedom fighters against Putin. Call out Hamas for being evil without, buts or, and call for release of our hostages. And the fact that so much of the world is afraid to do that, particularly the artists in America, goes to the theme of my song about October 7th. We are not okay. Something's broken in America. We've lost our soul. And that's something that if we don't address, the consequences, I think, will be dire.
It absolutely will. And as we're talking today, they announced tragically that they had recovered the bodies of 6 hostages, I believe Israelis, not Americans, to my knowledge. And that is still a very, top of mind thing for people. And I know you're in frequent communication with a lot of the hostage families. How are they feeling today with all this? We keep hearing about Iran is planning to potentially attack Israel. There's talks of a ceasefire negotiation, although Hamas, of course, does not seem willing to enter into negotiations reasonably. So what is the sense of the hostage families and the Israelis that you speak to who have been impacted by October 7th?
I've met heroic people in my career, Green Berets who rescue people in Afghanistan, just amazing people. But the hostage families, particularly the American hostage families, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they get up every day. They are incredibly strong. I think there was certainly some hope in the last few weeks that there might be a deal. I think that hope has waned in the last couple days because Hamas just seems intent on not doing anything. But yeah, there's really no words. It breaks your heart when you speak to them. You know, the Goldbergs, particularly, I speak to a lot, and their optimism and belief that they're going to have their son back, I think keeps them functioning. They're incredible, but yeah, it just breaks your heart. And as you know, we spoke in DC about, another example of why we're not okay. America is not aware of our hostages. They don't know their names. At the RNC, at least, one of the hostage families spoke. It was very prevalent. But even in Joe Biden's address at the DNC, he did not mention their names. He didn't talk about their families. He first talked about Palestine and basically gave a moral equivalency statement that, yeah, things are bad there because of Hamas. And then he mentioned the hostages, but it seems like people are afraid for some reason to mention their names. We talked about, I had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about in 1979, long before you were alive, Gabby, there was a hostage crisis. Iran, had hundreds of hostages, and every news show led with them, and there were yellow ribbons around every tree. And for some reason, that doesn't happen today. I think there's a political slant to it, but also I think America has lost its soul to a degree. And people talk about, well, it's the silent majority, they care. But I always say, like, silent majorities, if they remain silent too long, become silent minorities.
Mhm.
And I fear what's happening. So we're hoping to put out a yellow ribbon campaign for the hostage families, especially if there's no hostage deal, to keep that alive. But yeah, it's I met hostage families in Israel too when I went, and I sat with a father whose son was 24 years old and been hostage for what, boy, we're coming up on 10 months now. And my son was sitting next to me, my 24-year-old son, and I kept looking at my son going, we could be switched. It could be my son that was hostage. And how could I and my wife deal with that? And the fact that there's no more focus on our hostage families is, again, I think, a sign that something's broken.
I believe Americans, our fellow Americans, are desensitized to a lot of things. And perhaps I'm unusual because I told you a little bit, John, my family fled the Soviet Union. And I did have a distant relative. I don't talk about it publicly, but I wrote an op-ed about a decade ago. I had a relative that I never met. She was one of Hamas's earliest victims in the Second Intifada. And so
Wow.
it's very personal to me, seeing what these families are going to. It kind of reminds of the hardship, that my distant relatives had gone through to one of my dad's distant cousins, losing his daughter to that, and just seeing how Hamas is evil early on. And so I'm a little different where I can not be desensitized to these kinds of things. And I think others who are first generation, or maybe they're more immediately having proximity to it. And I would hope that more Americans, even if they're a little removed from these atrocities, whether it's socialism or October 7th or some sort of, totalitarian circumstance where you appreciate your freedom. I think people are rightfully so, angry about what's happening here in this country, but I think they forget that you can equally be concerned about what's happening here at home and also worry what's happening abroad, because those have broad stroke effects and what downstream effects to us, because what happens internationally definitely impacts us at home. I think people don't put those two together these days, unfortunately, lack of critical thinking, or very angry or short-sighted or whatever. But I think it's important to remember that there is a connection between what happens abroad. It also affects what happens here. When you have certain policies here, it affects obviously what happens abroad, and it affects us domestically. So I think people will see the connection. I'm trying to be optimistic and hope that they do. And I know with your voice out there, I think they can. But you were talking about patriotism and love of country earlier, and kind of in relation to these crazy protests happening on college campuses where a lot of the students are Hamasniks, talking openly in favor of a bloody intifada and all this. You are going to be participating. I don't know if at the time of this release, this already will have transpired, but you're going to be participating in Flagstock
Yeah.
with John Rich and a couple other artists, prominent artists, to pay tribute to a fraternity that had bravely put up the American flag at UNC Chapel Hill. Speak to that experience. What do you hope to get out of that participation in that event?
I think it's very important not just to go kind of give these frat boys a fun concert and drink beer with them, but I'm looking forward to that. but I think it's important to push back culturally with the arts. The arts is the way you get to the kids. You know, you see the polls on TikTok where it's like 90% anti-Semitic, and that's how kids are getting their information. So how do you get to them? They don't read the Wall Street Journal. They don't watch politicians speak. It's the arts. That's how you do it. And so Flagstock, I think, is a good example of pushing back on the mobs. Certainly free speech, you know, we're all about it. Of course, many of the mobs are breaking the rules and their illegal encampments, and the faculty's been enabling that, sometimes participating in it. But I think Flagstock's a good example of, hey, let's go celebrate these boys who did not accept the mobs tearing down the American flag and burning it. So yeah, it's going to be great. John Rich kind of led it. So Big and Rich, Lee Greenwood will be singing, of course, you know, proud to be an American. And I think it's important for the culture to see, okay, don't just sit on your couch and lament, oh, this is bad, this is terrible. We have to take the fight to these colleges. And I say that also that we need to save these kids who've been indoctrinated. It's basically a cult, right? They've been indoctrinated by their professors. They feel like they're doing the right thing. They don't have much information. Many of them don't know why they're doing it. They think it's kind of a fashion. So we need to save these kids. And you do that by going to these campuses, doing concerts, have speakers come, talk to them, let them understand what they're really, you know, supporting. You know, the Queers for Palestine, you know, it's so Orwellian that they're so wrapped up in this dogma that they don't understand. You know, many of them would be, you know, killed, taken hostage, or murdered if they went to their heroes. So I think we're going to do that this fall. I'm going to go to campuses. I'm going to perform. I'm going to speak. We're going to do other events to go on offense and not just sit back and accept that this is happening. Especially my school, UCLA, has become one of the worst. They literally had wristbands that it designated, you know, non-Jewish students, and students couldn't walk through campus. John Wooden, UCLA. So it's up to all of us, not just me, parents. Parents need to make a decision that I'm not sending my kid to that school. That's how it's going to change. If everybody waits for something better to happen, it's not. So that's kind of, you know, our, you know, at least my kind of feeling about the Yellow Ribbon Campaign, going to these schools, Flagstock, all this stuff. Use the arts to fight back because it's a cultural war. Bullets are not going to win this war for Israel. They never will. We have to start with the culture and start with the kids. And how do you do that? With the arts.
That's really true because a lot of these younger people, I'm a millennial, and I believe the Gen Zers respond to things very differently. I mean, I appreciate the arts, but I could still obviously, I grew up with newspapers, TV, analog TV, telephones, but these young people below me, in terms of generational differences, they didn't have these kind of traditional toys and tools. So they communicate very differently. They're largely visual creatures. Sometimes they rely largely on having a limited attention span. They can only absorb information, really small bite-sized pieces, but you're absolutely right. And also having gone to the UC system, I went to UC San Diego. It's dramatically taken a very bad direction. I wonder, do you think any of the students are going to invite you to Harvard, MIT, and some of these other schools where it was really charged and really crazy? Do you think you're going to have some visits there to maybe perform or engage in kind of some artistic expression there?
That's the plan. Yes, I was actually yesterday or the day before talking to some Hillel leaders in New York about SUNY Purchase, which has been horrible. Columbia has reached out to me, UCLA, USC students. So yes, and then I'm hoping we did an event at MIT, which was great. It was organized by a student. Matisyahu played, Idan Reichel played, I played. Thousands of people came right in the quad in the center of school. And it was so cathartic for not just the MIT students. You know, students came from Harvard, they came from Cornell. And I think it's very important to let the Jewish kids and the sane kids know they're not alone. We got their back. And also show that, you know, the protesters and the faculty that we're not going to accept this. And so I hope that we do a lot of these because, as you know, when September comes around, it's all going to ramp up again.
Yep.
And hopefully, you know, there'll be other artists that join us. And you don't have to love Israel. It's not about Israel. It's about civilization against those who want to destroy it. It's about anti-Americanism. It's about Marxism. when I was in Israel, I talked to Natan Sharansky a little bit, and he said something that's really stuck with me. He said 20 years ago, somebody asked him, what's the biggest threat to the Western world, to freedom and the values that we hold so dear? And he said 20 years ago, American academia. And he was right, because he saw that happen in Russia.
Yep.
When Russia, started becoming totalitarian, it started at the colleges. It started with the students. So he's seen this movie before. So if we don't kind of get ahead of this or actually catch up to this, because it's been happening for decades, we know this is nothing new. We're going to suffer the consequences. So I think it's important that we do that, and hopefully, look, any kids, any school that's listening, reach out to me, and we will come to your university. We will stand with you. We'll push back on the bullies, and we are seeing some positive signs. The president of Columbia finally resigned. UCLA looks like they're having a more sane chancellor coming in. We're seeing, some, especially in the South. Look, this stuff doesn't happen in the SEC, right?
No, definitely
So,
not.
yeah, so we know that there's some sanity out there. So I do think there's some momentum to do the right thing. So we'll have to get back on a podcast, in a few
You have
months
to
and
revisit and see what
see how
happened.
that's all
Absolutely.
going. Yeah.
Yeah, I would hope you get invited to some Virginia schools, because I know our government here does not tolerate that. So I feel like UVA would probably want to have
Yeah.
you, maybe Virginia Tech. So you should try to come to those too. They're not going to be as hostile as some of the others in the Northeast have been. But I'm trying to, absorb all you've said, because it's just so refreshing that, a musician I admired for much of my lifetime, speaking truth to power with your music so powerfully. And I think a lot of people are in my position where, I have musicians that I like and admire who don't agree with me politically. I love certain music, and that's fine and dandy, and you have to have that. But it's nice to see musicians like you that you can admire, that you've admired for so long, taking very good, virtuous stands and having moral clarity about, what is happening around the world. And I hope other musicians similarly echo what you do, John. But kind of relating to your music, I know you haven't really released full-length albums in a while. Do you think, with all the inspiration and just the awareness that you've had recently, do you think you could replicate, music like Superman, 100 years, new songs of that similar vein in the present day? Do you have plans to do that in the future?
Well, I think I'm at an interesting place. It's kind of like where I started, where, once I started making records, I kind of, the whole kind of strategy was have a popular song so you could make another one. So I got to write the hit, I got to write this, and and then you have the luxury of maybe 9 other songs. That's really just your artistic expression. Not many people make albums anymore, and I lament that, because I love the song number 7 that'll never be on the radio. But I'm also at a place where I don't, I'm not going to have a hit on the radio. If I wrote 100 years today, at my age, we all age out. Springsteen wrote a song about it. He was so mad. But I do have also seen how these songs have resonated globally. They haven't had one spin on the radio and have tens of millions of impressions. So I've seen how the music can still impact folks. And I would like to write, songs that are not so pointed and so frankly depressing. And so for the first time, I think in 10 years, I'm kind of excited about doing a full length record. I'm not sure what they are. And I'm not sure, I certainly won't be like trying to write a song that's a hit, but I think I've found an inspiration and kind of a little bit of a muse to do it. And whatever happens with it, happens with it. I love writing songs. I love producing songs. And there's so much content. Also, now that I'm older, now I'm in the bridge of 100 years, write about what it's like to be older, and how my life is now. If you look at my records, you can see, okay, this is when he was a young guy chasing girls, he loves cars, 65 Mustang. And then you can totally see when I had kids, the Two Lights record, then everything becomes about the kids. And then it becomes what kind of world you want. And so I think it'd be, at least for me, kind of maybe a cathartic experience to write about, okay, I'll be turning 60 next year, and what's that about? So hopefully next year or before too long, we'll have, Five for Fighting record number 7. But we'll see what happens. If something happens in the world and I feel I have to write about it right away, I'll do that too.
Yeah, my friend Madison was telling me that it is very challenging, even as an up and coming artist, to release music full length albums because people just only want to listen to the one single song. What I've seen with her success, and I bet you've seen this too with releasing the individual singles, is that you don't necessarily have to either have a record deal or a full length project. Songs can just go viral on Spotify, maybe for some random reason. Someone behind the scenes picks your song, puts it on a playlist, and boom, you get thousands of listens and downloads. And as you talked about when we met in person at your concert, okay, getting amplified by Israel's Twitter and social media accounts. And so it just went viral in that respect. So you never know if you put the music out there to the universe or to let it materialize. So many people can pick it up. Social media is such a powerful tool. So I feel like whatever music you do release will be absorbed by social media and possibly, you know, expand that way without necessarily using the traditional structure you may have used previously for some of your older song and older material.
Yeah, you're right. You know, there's certainly, I think, a downside from the death of the album because, as I said, you know, I think there's, you know, there is an experience putting on something and listening for an hour, and the album tracks, you know, songs that are not supposed to be singles sometimes become so powerful in the culture. New York State of Mind, a good example from Billy Joel. And if you're always just shooting out singles every 3 months, you know, you're not going to have that. On the other hand, as you said, these days, you can make a beautiful sounding song on your laptop. It doesn't cost much money. You can make a video for a few $1,000s. You can use the internet, and hundreds of thousands or millions of people can find you without a record company. So the landscape has become much more fair. Typically before, you had to have a record deal because you had to get to radio and you had to basically pull some strings to get radio to play your songs. So it was very kind of a monopoly and a niche. So the beauty is, you're right, anybody can write a song, put it out, the world can find it and catch it. You can build a career. So yeah, you know, and for me, you know, I'm really not focused on, you know, selling or monetizing. It's just like write stuff that matters to me, and hopefully it resonates with folks. And also, what's these last three songs I think have really illustrated is shine the light where it belongs. You know, shine the light on our Afghan veterans, the Afghan women who still can't go to school. You know, shine the light on this, you know, David fighting Goliath in Ukraine that's been pushed off the map because of Israel Hamas. Shine the light on our hostages that nobody's talking about, the hostage families. So for me, that's what I feel my role is now. Use my platform, use the music to shine the light on these causes, and let people who feel abandoned, like Jewish people, like Afghans, understand that they're not. They're not. And through these songs, I think that's happening.
Music does heal, and even when certain musicians or certain musical styles may not appeal to your senses, I feel like artists like you and others are tapping into that deficit and giving people comfort through the different tunes, the different songs, albums out there. So I hope you continue to do what you do. I've been as I mentioned, I've been a longtime fan of your work. I'm so glad we're connected and friends now in real life, and I wish you continued success. John, if anyone wants to support you, potentially this, you know, yellow ribbon campaign, see you in concert, you know, listen to your music, where would you like to send them to?
Yeah, thanks. Everything's up at fightforfighting.com. We'll actually be doing a string quartet tour starting at the end of September, and we'll be in the Northeast, all around New York and Maine and New Hampshire with the string quartet, and they're amazing. John Ondrasik on Twitter, Fight for Fighting Music, and Instagram, Fight for Fighting on Facebook. But yeah, and you can always email me at the website. It comes right to me, and we'll be launching you know, some stuff for the Yellow Ribbon campaign soon. And I have to say too, Gabby, it's like I'm a fan of yours too.
Oh.
You're a great writer. You know, we all fight the good fight in our own way, right? And we, especially your generation, you guys are so critical. You are the future. So thank you for all you do. It's great to be your pal, and hopefully we'll see you at a Fight for Fighting show soon again, because that DC show was a lot of fun.
I would love to come back and see what the symphony is like. And, you know, talking to you got me maybe potentially wanting to revisit my piano skills when I get some time. So hopefully,
All right.
fingers crossed. Yeah, because no, I was pretty good at the time, but you know, I was
Hey,
entering teenage phases, and sports and other things, academics took over. So I should probably revisit that. So I may, at your insistence.
it's good for the soul, and then you can come up and do a duet with me.
Ah, yeah, I have to relearn it. It's probably going to take some time.
All
So
right.
that'd be a lot of fun. John, such a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabby.